All right, it's time to get started. Hi, everybody. Hi, Manchester. How are you doing today? I hope surviving the second day. Very well. I am Roman, and I flew all the way from Dublin. Almost jet-lagged a little bit. I am a security nerd and doing security for almost 20 years now. All the way from threat modeling, secure development lifecycle, vulnerability management, and etc. Now I am with Red Hat, and I'm principal architect there, responsible for security community and industry engagement. Also, earlier this year, I embarked on the nice journey that is called EU Cyber Resilience Act, and I joined some of the efforts that are happening there as an expert at the European standardization organizations. But also, I'm a huge open source supporter, security lead maintainer and contributor to open source, which we all depend on. Now, today, we're going to talk about the EU Cyber Resilience Act a little bit, and there will be two parts of it. The first, the quick overview. This talk is not meant to kind of be boring around compliance and etc. Because the second part will be about the tools, about the practical approaches, and what we're going to do about that as developers, as maintainers, as contributors, as open source ecosystem. So hopefully it's going to be some fun. Who is familiar with EU Cyber Resilience Act or have heard about it at least? Half. And who is scared about EU CRA? Just a few of us. I'm also scared, so let's hug after the presentation. Okay, let's kick it off. First of all, of course, what's the EU Cyber Resilience Act? It is the regulation that aims to, first and foremost, safeguard consumers and businesses buying or using products with digital elements, so-called PDEs, which apparently includes all the hardware and software, because almost everything now contains digital element. It is with mandatory cybersecurity requirements, mainly for manufacturers or for vendors for these products throughout the entire life cycle, and its supply chain, including third parties and open source. Why we're talking about CRA here in the UK, for example, or throughout other countries besides EU 27, because CRA is actually applicable worldwide and to all who does commercial activity in or with the EU. And also, if you're familiar with the term Brussels effect, right? It's going to be something that other countries potentially will look at as they implement their own cybersecurity strategies and etc. And if you're wondering what's this cheese picture, right? It depicts like the intention behind the CRA. This is actually produced by EU Commission. Quite nice, represents the idea behind the Cyber Resilience Act. Now, starting with the definitions for products with digital elements, PDEs. I'm going to use this term throughout the presentation. CRA regulates PDEs that are placed on the EU market and intended for the course of commercial activities, which is quite essential because there are a lot of myths around the CRA, and one of them that it's applicable to like everything, right? It's only for PDEs that are placed in the course of commercial activities. But PDEs are everywhere, right? Which is quite understandable, and there are a few classes of them under the regulation. For example, important class 1 contains smart home operating systems, web browsers, password managers, VPNs, and a few others, in summary 19 types of products, which are definitely in scope of the regulation. Now there is another class of products, which includes firewalls, tamper-resistant CPUs, hypervisors, which are also in scope. Another critical category, which includes even more critical things like hardware devices with security boxes, smart mirror gateway, smart cards. But And if you look into these categories, it kind of makes sense. They are kind of important and critical by nature, right? I don't want to be hacked through, for example, my smart home appliance, right? Something like that. But the thing is that everything else is also in scope. There is a default category, which is comprised of everything else, all consumer devices, everything that's in our pockets, laptops, and everything else. And software as well is in scope, which is quite nice. And the rest, 90% of software, hardware devices, everything else falls under this category. This is really important to understand because, again, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. Now, what's out of scope? If we speak what's in scope, it's very important to outline what's out of scope. Products covered by other regulations or directives, for example, automotive, medical, aviations. This is quite unclear now because, for example, e-scooter, whether it is automotive or not, or the certain parts of automotive supply chain, it's going to be clarified, I think, as we navigate this. Also, products designed for national security, classified information out of scope. Kind of makes sense. Pure website out of scope. Software as a service. There are a lot of debates about this right now. It is included as out of scope into regulation. But if it's designed solely for normal functionality of a PD, for example, if you use the cloud app for monitoring or ruling your fridge, for example, it is its scope because it's kind of untouchable part of the product with digital elements. So it is in scope. And it's still to be done around clarification. What does that mean? Remote data processing, RDP, so-called in this case, and how cloud providers and those services are going to be distinguishing or dividing their roles and responsibilities with others. So that's still a little bit unclear now. And finally, free and open source software, if not used in the course of commercial activities, out of scope, which is quite nice. 1 year ago, or actually almost 2 years ago, when the first draft or CRA was introduced, there was no distinguishing between the commercial products and open source. And that's quite interesting because back in the days, policymakers thought that open source is something that's for hobbyists and it's nothing to do with the real life. Right? Then open source community and the companies like Red Hat and others stood up and say, hey, actually, everything runs on Linux and other open source. And that's why we now have this exclusion. Now, we can finish this talk, right? Open source out of scope, nothing to do with this, but devil in details, of course. That's why it deserves clarification and further examples. This is quite nice that yesterday there is official CRA guide and FAQ released by EU Commission on the official website. You can Google it. I'm going to drop the slide so you can follow the link, but you can simply Google it. This is quite an anticipated thing, and we also contributed to this. This is good source of truth and good FAQ and answers to the typical questions. Just got released yesterday. Now, when we talk about open source out of scope, I'm going to bring this example that I witnessed firsthand. There are a lot of similar examples, but that is what I saw personally. So it's quite small on the screen. I'm going to comment it a little bit. This is the email that's been sent to libc, which is open source library, right? To libc maintainers. Hello, I hope this message finds you well, but can you actually tell us a little bit more about your projects? Is secure software development lifecycle followed by your projects, right? Respond yes or no. Or do you comply with the UC CRA requirements? Do you provide proof of conformity? What? We don't even know how to do it as a company yet, right? But this is query for open source project. And the final thing, this is kind of, if you compare the dates, they kindly asked to respond in 2 weeks by the open source project. So that's quite funny thing, I believe. But on the other hand, it's happening a lot, and that's really represents or depicts how open source can be affected even indirectly. Now, you know what? Open source maintainers owe you nothing, right? A famous quote by Mike White. So this is somehow needs to be managed within the ecosystem, and this is the challenge on the other hand, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, this is a huge, massive opportunity for us as a kind of enterprise and open source ecosystem as a whole to come together and to work on the improving security posture, which is quite nice because I'm a security guy, so I see the positive things under the CRA 100%. Now, before we dive into the roles under the regulation, it's very important to understand how it's intended to play together. And I'm going to bring this example, again using this cheese picture. Manufacturer, right, who is the vendor, provides product with digital elements to customer or to partner, right, like sells software or hardware or something. Now, let's pretend that this product uses open source. By the way, who uses open source in production, right? So everybody, right? So this is happening. Vulnerability pops up in the open source project. Now the intention is that, of course, open source projects wanted to fix it themselves, but now we have an opportunity so that the manufacturer can go and support this open source project, maybe provide some fixes or PR, or at least kind of advise how to do it better. And this is, again, intention under the CRA to let them work together. Now, let's pretend that we consume not one open source project, but thousands, like everybody does, right? And in this case, probably one manufacturer is not going to support 1,000 of them, simply no resources, kind of no focus. Then probably it kind of makes sense to introduce this new entity that we call now Open Source Software Steward, like Linux Foundation, Eclipse Foundation, or other foundations that hosts a number of open source projects, right? And this foundation would help all of these projects to deal with the security issues in this particular case, right? Now, manufacturer can choose whatever, for example, pay money or support resource-wise these foundations to kind of, then these foundations can help projects. And yeah, everybody are quite happy because we have all these fixes, and open source projects have support that they actually wanted for forever, for the whole entire life of open source, right? They're all under-resourced, of course, and overwhelmed, the maintainers, right? So that makes quite everybody happy, manufacturer and customer and everybody else. So that's why in CRA we have all of these roles in the regulation, which starts with manufacturer, who is vendor, right? The company who produces the software or hardware. Importer or distributor is also an important role. We can call it partner, reseller, and main obligation of this entity would be to make sure that manufacturer is compliant, does conformity assessment, and produces CE mark, conformity assessment. Developer, contributor, and maintainer out of scope if don't monetize projects, the open source projects that I already mentioned. And now we have the brand new entity under the CRA, which is called Open Source Software Steward. Of course, this is not made up entity. As I mentioned, the foundations were thus like for quite a number of years. Now, the first time, then this entity formally appears in the regulation, which is quite nice recognition of how the whole ecosystem works. The sudden reality is that most of the open source projects will not have a steward, right? There are a lot of statistics around that, but more than 90% of the projects, they just have one or maximum two maintainers. There is no the big foundation or big company behind this project. So that's important to keep in mind. Now the timeline. The timeline is here. Actually, CRA is already in force officially since December 2024, but all the obligations or requirements would need to be met a little bit later. This is the whole timeline, but I would encourage you to focus on the two critical dates. September 2026, reporting obligations for vulnerabilities comes to force. I will be talking about this a little bit later. What does that mean? And the full application, all other obligations, including secure development lifecycle and conformity assessment and everything else, will come into force in December 2027. Sounds like far away, but in fact it is not. Why do we care? Of course, because we love security, right? But also, we really don't love the fines, and we don't really want to be fined, and etc. And this is a huge, massive potential financial consequences for the companies that are not in compliance. Now, I still got a lot of questions about, okay, am I affected? I am a software developer in the company. Should I worry about this if my company doesn't? Or I contribute to open source occasionally, or I'm maintainer of the open source project. I do something in GitHub, like we have seen already in this conference, right? We all do something on GitHub. So what I'm going to do? I am affected or not? That's why I produced this diagram. That is again quite not that big, but I'm gonna walk you with this. So if you're a contributor to the project that you are not a maintainer for, go down. You have no obligations under CRA. Just don't worry about it at all. If you are a maintainer and do not take money for anything, like you just release open source project and support it, but don't take money at all, you have no obligations. Like, forget about this. If you're a maintainer and accept donations that cover reasonable costs, you also are good and have no obligations. Reasonable costs still is kind of unclear what does that mean, but it will actually be clarified, I hope, in Q1 with the so-called FOSS guidance, the specific guidance by the EU Commission for open source ecosystem that's we now developing. And if you're a maintainer and charge for support, service, data, or project itself, like money, some additional money, if you earn anything out of it, CRA is likely applicable to you. But of course, there are a lot of other caveats that could be applied. But in this case, you may want to look into it at least. But in other cases, you just can do whatever you want. Which is good news, and it's really important to educate each other about this. To kind of draw the bottom line, if you're a contributor or software developer, just simply out of scope. If you're a maintainer, you're out of scope if don't monetize. If any of those roles, you're out of scope if the project is not a product with digital elements, PDE, and also have an enormous amount of questions about that. Not all the open source projects or products, or even something that you may produce, binaries, whatever, PDEs. For example, documentation or research scientific projects, they are not products by definition. So you're out of scope. And you're out of scope if the PDE is not placed on the EU market. Also, they're quite important to understand. And finally, just to make sure we all kind of feel a little bit calmer ourselves. All requirements, almost all requirements for manufacturers and all the fines for manufacturers. There are a few requirements for stewards, but the 99% of the heavy lifting is for manufacturers. And all the fines are also for them. Now, requirements for manufacturers at glance. There is kind of a list. This is not exhaustive list, but to give you a sneak peek, what's required for manufacturers, for the company: security by design and by default, do risk management, data communication protection, clear documentation, including security pieces into it, vulnerability management, report exploited CVEs, so-called actively exploited CVs, not all the CVs, and severe incidents, if they happen, to EU authorities, namely ENISA or a local member states CSORT, and also do due diligence for third parties and SBOMs. And I highlighted it because it's going to be important in the context of the open source ecosystem. Also, updates. Manufacturers are required to disseminate them without delays. No certain timelines, but kind of without delay as soon as possible. And conformity and CE marking. That's quite new. I mean, if you read through these requirements, probably a lot of them kind of resonate with the normal security standards or secure development lifecycle that should be implemented in kind of all the companies already. But conformity and CE marking is kind of new thing. If you look at your kind of phone or, I don't know, printer or whatever, you can spot on this CE sticker, and that's all. And this is now required for software. We're still figuring out how to affix this to the piece of software or piece of code, but this is requirement now. And one last but important one is the 5 years. This is minimal support period and security updates that manufacturers would need to provide for free if they place products to the market. And 10 years retention of documentation and updates available, which is quite heavy actually. But this is a requirement now. Okay, you might ask me the question, that sounds like broad requirements, nothing concrete. What I should do exactly? And what you should do exactly will be clarified in the standards. I mentioned in the very beginning that I'm also participating in the standardization activities and ESOS, so-called European Standardization Organizations, which is Sentinel and ETSI, developing 41 standards, 41. To implement the CRA requirements or to break down the CRA requirements into the technical requirements. By the end of 2025, all of the drafts should be ready for review, actually, and most of them should be ready for the public review, and some of them already are. It makes sense to check them out. Draft CRA standards. Now it's time to say, I mentioned that if you're not participating in these activities, the whole ecosystem may fall apart, unfortunately. And that's why I think it's very important to say to participate, to be engaged. Now we have the 2 horizontal standards are available. I posted the link here to the Estonian authorities because they're available without any registration and anything else, just by direct links. But all the EU member states, they published them. In some countries, you need to register, but if you just wanted to have a look, there are direct links to them. And 14 verticals. Remember those categories, right? Password managers, operating systems, and etc. There will be standards for each category to break down the exact requirements for them. And a lot of them are now, namely 14, now are already in the public review, so anybody can have a look, and anybody can comment, anybody can provide their feedback. And actually, that's quite desired, because we don't receive that much feedback right now. So please spread the word or comment yourself. Why should open source care, right? I mentioned all of these standards for manufacturers. Why should open source care? Because manufacturers must now collaborate with open source and with ecosystem because they have due diligence requirements. Remember I mentioned due diligence for third parties, which includes open source. Now when manufacturers, well, all of us ingest open source, we want to make sure that they secure and exercise due diligence. The concrete requirement, what does that mean, are also under development right now, but that is how open source comes to picture. okay? Because they're going to be chased by manufacturers anyway. Now, to the second part of the talk. So this is quite nice, the EU Resilience Act and all of the intentions that bring all the parties, manufacturers, steward, open source, ecosystem, everybody else, experts, to the one table and collaborate to finally fix the supply chain issues for the industry. That sounds kind of the fantastic, the bright new world. Of course, there are a lot of but in this, and one of them, this, right? One of the problem is this. Another problem is, if you remember this kind of collaboration activity, when manufacturer pays or pretend you're a company, you pay for something, especially if you used to consume open source for free and now you kind of support some open source projects or encourage to pay for something, you want something in return, right? Our business leaders and our procurement just doesn't work that way, right? We should be certain that we get something in return. And there are a lot of conversations right now how to make this right, both beneficial for manufacturers, but also beneficial for open source projects that finally can get some support and funding to, make their projects even better. And one of the approaches is the notion of the attestations. That's so-called voluntary open source security attestations. It is codified by in the CRA in the Article 25, if I'm not mistaken. So that open source project can voluntarily follow some certain procedures, which is under development right now by this link. We kind of do develop how it may look like, so that they can give this attestation, evidence, whatever you can call it, to manufacturers, say, hey, I'm good. I'm CRA kind of compatible. I don't like compliance in application to open source. That's why you're CRA compatible. So I've done these certain security steps, and my security posture is good enough for you, manufacturer, to consume my open source project. Because the majority of open source projects, of course, once they be widely adopted, right, and consumed by the world. Now, there are a lot of questions that are asked. What does CRA mean for me anyway, right? Still the question. What exactly to do for open source project to be CRA compatible? How to document that FOSS project is CRA compatible, right? How to prove it? Who should do what in the process? And how steward may help? And also, who is responsible for what when we pretend the long supply chain? Right? There are a lot of companies that are in the middle of supply chain that are kind of consumer of the open source and manufacturers, but also they give something to manufacturers down the chain, right? Who is responsible for actual fixes? Is it the last manufacturer in the supply chain, right? As I mentioned, a lot of these questions. So there are bad news, but there are also good news. You're not alone in this journey, and everybody asking this question, and we also ask these questions. And we decided why not to collaborate together on clarifying these questions. And the current and upcoming official clarification and guidance by EU Commission is direct consequence of how industry came together to actually make sure we do CRA it right. Right? Because again, intention is fantastic. Now we should be very careful with the implementation. Now, why do we care specifically the Red Hat? Because we are a manufacturer, of course. We provide open source software solutions for the global market, including the EU, quite a big deal. Operating systems, cloud platforms, automation platforms, now AI solutions, and etc. So we are a vendor. We are open source software steward for a number of open source projects. For example, Fedora is the simplest example, right? This is a free and open source operating system, which we support specifically. Now, thousands of Red Hatters, literally, I'm not joking, every day are contributing and maintain open source projects. So we are kind of trying to navigate all of these roles. That's why we are one of the weirdest company in context of the CRA, because we have all of these roles, and we need to work with all of them. And as I mentioned previously, we are leading CRA efforts in open source communities and also in EU official standardization bodies to make sure open source ecosystem is CRA compliant, healthy, and etc. And this is kind of our mission. Now, moving on to a little bit of specifics. Where we do this and how we're going to learn more and join our efforts. OSC working group. By the way, I have some nice stickers and pins. After the talk, please come over and take some cool stuff. This working group, which I'm on steering committee of, does FAQ and white papers, resources, frameworks, guidances, explanations, and etc. And this is all free collaboration. I mean, you can join the calls, you can join the group, you can read, you can participate in the meetings, you can, of course, contribute by even asking your questions. This working group in particular is famous because of the first and I think the most referred right now source as an FAQ for the CRA. Of course, before EU Commission published their own one. But we still have a lot of questions that we collect answers from manufacturers, from developers, from everybody else, and then we try to judge these answers ourselves, and if we are not sure, we try to make sure they are clarified by EU officials. It has now, it's all on GitHub. Again, it's all open source, free completely, without SMS and registrations. But it also has now the nice website with the friendly looking interface. And there are, again, a lot of questions from basic questions to more advanced questions. For example, if I'm releasing binaries, I'm in scope or not, besides just the source code. Right? Or what does that mean, attestations, or how exactly I should report my vulnerabilities, or who is my authority if I'm operating across the EU 27 member states. Okay, so all of these questions we're trying to collect so that they got answered. And next avenue that I want you to check out the OpenSSF, and if you attended the previous talk in the room next to here, we have heard about the OpenSSF efforts and a lot of tools to improve security posture. And this is the relatively new initiative, which I'm co-chairing together with Dan Appelquist of Samsung. What we do here, we do clarifications, blog posts, workshops, guidances, tools. Probably one of the most important things that we have done so far is this free CRA class. If you're gonna check it out, it would be nice. It's completely free, and it's kind of beginner intro to the CRA, and it also would give you the nice badge, like Credly badge that you can attach to your LinkedIn profile. I think we now have over 5,000 people taking this class, which is quite fascinating. Also, you can join us, again, tell your story, ask your questions, or contribute. Completely open source, open collaboration. We don't judge anybody. We're friendly to anybody. Actually, we have collaborators from around the world, right? And I think we have maybe 1/3 or even more collaborators not from EU countries, right? From UK, from US, from Asia, and etc. Join us here. One of the things that OpenSSF also does is so-called open source product security baseline. And I'm going to show you how it's related to CRA, but it's a framework or the standard, if you will, that covers actually not only security thing, despite the name, security, right? It spans over documentation and legal and governance and quality besides security. Just good development practices. And it's really focused. There are only must requirements, no shoot, like you want to implement these requirements, or you're not following the standard. And this is realistic. So this is made for developers. And primarily it was made for the open source, but you can use it internally. We use it internally as a company, right? Because it's like a good set of security practices. Just one example, out of 62 requirements, when a new collaborator is added, the version control system must require manual permission assignment or restrict the collaborator permissions to the lower privilege. Kind of makes sense, right? Everybody should do this already, I think. But this is now quite structured over the 3 levels, and you can check it out. Open source, OSPS and CRA. This is the understanding that we need to provide some good frameworks and tooling in order to implement the CRA requirements, specifically in open source project in this case, but I would encourage you to look at it also from your internal company perspective. This is a mapping. It's quite work in progress. We adjust as we go, but for example, one of the requirements, all compiled released software assets must be delivered with a software bill of materials, SBOMs, okay? And it directly correlated with the CRA requirements of the SBOM. And you can check it out. This mapping is already done in the OSPS itself. You can check the link. Of course, it's free, and you also can contribute to it if you want. Now, it may help with the voluntary attestations. Remember, I mentioned this concept of voluntary attestations and the CRA-compatible concept. It will help with the due diligence for manufacturers, right? That's the understanding, that once we have those standards, just as the good security practices, and once we promote these standards that we already do actually to authorities, it's going to be a standard for the industry, because it just makes sense. It's just how security works in the practical and meaningful way. I will give you another example just from the top of my head. The BSI, the German BSI, not the British one, which is standardization, which is information security body of the Germany. They recently produced their standards for open source. And we contributed as Red Hat as a company to its standards, and also it's mapped to or mentioned extensively OSPS. This kind of makes sense. How CRA compatible may look like for the projects? Again, this is mostly and started like as a open source initiative by this brilliant person, James Serling, but it's kind of can be done in the developer-friendly way. Again, our goal as a kind of industry support is to make most out of the CRA in the most practical way, right? Not like, okay, we are now following the papers or checking the boxes, but this is how you can check this open source repo. It's of course free. You can check how it could be documented and what are the requirements and how they can be documented in the GitHub in the Markdown. Okay. Another good initiative that came out of the OpenSSF is Security Insights specification, or Security Insights YAML file, which is machine-readable format of stating security posture. Like I am as a project implement static analysis scan, or I implement the dependency analysis scan, I fix CV, this is my threat model, I do this, this, and that. So basically declaration, what I do, what security practice I do in the machine-readable way, which is kind of a good thing. Again, practical way, so that then the manufacturers can, or everybody else, the users, can verify it. Another initiative that I must mention here is open source sustainability workstream at OWASP. It's another open source community, and together with ECMA, standardization body, they're working on contributing YAML specification, which also intended to express some of the some pieces of the posture of the project. It goes far beyond the security in the CRA because it also includes, okay, I'm done with the project, for example, right? And the way how to express this by the maintainer. If you can look out the open source projects, quite a lot of them are kind of in the best effort support because probably they're finished, right? It may be applicable to some scientific libraries and etc. So they just complete it and receive the minimal support. And this is the specification how to express such things. Or if maintainer needs help, right, with I don't know, with a graphical design. Again, with machine-readable format, so that those who wanted to learn more about projects or potentially support can consume it as the YAML file in machine-readable format and figure out quite quickly what support they wanted to provide to the project or what the posture of the project itself. So that's both YAML specifications would benefit actually manufacturers and would provide the declaration of CRA compatibility, quote unquote, for open source project that is verifiable by manufacturer. Now, again, this is all open source practices, but they're quite useful also to try it out inside the companies as well. Now, a little bit more to maintainers. How to react. Do we have any maintainers in the room who can kind of do open source development a little bit? Okay, so this is for maintainers, but for others to make sure. Do you remember this? Like, okay, you have 2 weeks to produce me proof of conformity for your open source project. So quite scary, right? Companies already kind of chasing all of this stuff. And they are asking the questions, are you CRA compliant? You know, we're doing the audits. I offer, or for example, I offer you to become steward, right? Like big companies or foundations can come to us and say, hey, why don't you join our foundations? I will be a steward. How to react, right? First of all, calm down and consider it as a collaboration opportunity, right? Express how to help your projects or think of how it might be helpful. You don't have to do anything. That is the bottom line, right? Period. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to have a steward. You don't have even to respond to this. Feel no obligation to accept anything. You may want to point out to another entity who actually monetize projects, and this is the case for some of the popular projects like curl or OpenSSL. They're both open source, but also they have partners or other entities that do commercial activity. So that could be a right way to point out. Don't be over-defensive. This is my recommendation. We are friendly open source community, right? I wanted to just, use the bad word, right? Provide the gentle, I'm not your supplier response. And I have all of these links and examples that you can use right away and how to provide it even in the legal language if you want. So there are all templates available under the ORC FAQ. What you want to do instead of pissing off and saying, hey, go away, as a maintainer or as a supporter of the open source project, is just improve security posture. Do the right things, if not already. The brilliant explanation talks about how OpenSSF tools can help with this. But yes, enable available security features on your favorite Git platform. Always good stuff to enable default settings in whatever environment you work in, on the Git platform, in the cursor, in the IDEs, whatever. Just enable security defaults, right? Check security vulnerability management policy, which is also called security.markdown.md. Baseline, I mentioned it. Insights, also I got some examples on it. OpenSSF best practices page, also a good thing. Document security assessments, that is particularly done by the several projects under CNCF, Cloud Native Foundation of Linux Foundation. So that's a good example of how to document your security posture. SBOMs, There are a lot of tools, I know, to do this, but also there are a lot of tools how to navigate all of these SBOMs. For example, Guac and Trustify, those open source tools are meant to combine SBOMs, CVs, vendor advisories, VEX files, and etc. in the one bucket and one database, and most importantly, with a friendly UI interface, so that you can search, you can have these dashboards, and etc. Actually, quite enterprise great solution, but it's completely open source and free to use. Now, you want to ask me, okay, this is like all of the good things, but what about automation? Can I actually, do it automatically somehow? Of course, yes, automate it, and I already mentioned best practices page. This is just an example, and key cloak, I just took this project. This is actually security project itself, I think the most adopted open source IDM/SSO solution, but I use it as a guinea pig here because it has best practices page. If you do something in the open source, you can kind of do this assessment against best practices and earn this badge on the GitHub. So that is an indication that you've done the good things, the good security things already. Also, it's quite small, but also it contains this scorecard. We have heard about OpenSSF scorecards, I think, at least twice on this conference, if not more. This is quite a nice automated way how to check against, against some things that may or may not be implemented in the project, dangerous workflows, and release, vulnerability management, how it's maintained, token permissions, and etc. And this particular tool is actually quite useful, not only for open source or for checking how open source projects are doing, but also inside the company. I implemented scorecards in a few companies in my career internally to make sure that we do a great job with our own repos that we maintain internally. So give it a look. Automated with Minder, this is another quite nice tool that can roll out actually some of the security rules, and as a GitHub Actions, for example, there are a few templates for it, so it's also open source, and automate some of the good security practices and roll them out throughout your tools. And finally, continuous compliance as code. This is also quite relevant to CRA, actually, because compliance as code is a good thing if you do your software development in cloud-native environments or in modern kind of agile environments otherwise. It leverages NIST, US NIST, OSCAL specification for kind of interchange between tools and people when we talk about compliance, when we talk about the set of the requirements that could be like in the spreadsheets or somewhere else, and converting them to machine-readable format. Specifically, tools like ComplyTime, like I'm going to show right here, developer-centric, API-driven, end-to-end tool to automate these things, to translate compliance requirements all the way down to the actual actions in your, for example, Kubernetes environment when it comes to cloud native, and then to produce the reports, actually to assess whether you implemented or all right, or how you collect evidences. How it exactly works, it takes like spreadsheets, as I mentioned, and whatnot. It's converted to machine-readable format as the assessment plan, policy templates, and then it produces OSCAL assessment results, which is also kind of machine-readable and quite well documented as a specification under OSCAL, so it's kind of standardized way to do things. And then you can use the policy engines like Caverna, for example, for Kubernetes to roll it automatically out. Quite a nice things to automate. How it could be helpful for CRA, because like a few examples, essential cybersecurity requirements of the CRA mandates you document technical security measures such as access control, data encryption, update mechanisms, exactly what OSCAL can provide you, and OSCAL Compass and ComplyTime specifically as a CD, so-called component definitions. Or the next one is about the technical documentation, so that you can have all of these things automatically done to you and then verified and then stored as an evidence, right? Continuous compliance with verifiable evidences. Now, to kind of draw a conclusion a little bit, why CRA is good. CRA has a potential to actually fix all of these supply chain issues. As we, and me personally, as a security expert, we have been working with developers, with IT people, with everybody else say, hey, security is important, implement your security development lifecycle. Now, it's a regulation, right? Which is quite nice at some point. How to make CRA even better? Collaborate, right? Because the CRA actually goes beyond just CRA compliance, because it brings, as I mentioned, all of these parties, manufacturers, stewards, maintainers, everybody else to the one table, so that we can finally make security as a default expectation. You can read about this at the Red Hat blog. We wrote about this. Takeaways. First of all, do not stop contributing and support open source because of the CRA. Unfortunately, that happens, and I believe right now it is still happening at the lower level, but we saw a shutdowning of the projects or declining of the contributing because people are afraid. Do not stop contributing. You're not affected, right? Just don't do this. Continue to contribute to open source. EU Commission itself keeps reminding everybody that the CRAs from manufacturers most and foremost, so they're not going to chase open source projects anyway. Learn and educate others in the community, in your companies. It's free, as I mentioned. Take the free class, spread the word about it, and keep educating them. Take it as a call for improving quality and security posture for the software, right? Act now. 2 years from now is quite far away, but not really. Implement now good security practices, and like 90% of them are just the good security practices. And if you implement 3 to 5 things, you most likely will be already CRA compatible. And join community efforts. We need more voices to improve. I mentioned all of these working groups. We are very welcome you as the participants. We are very welcome your questions. We welcome your challenges. If doing something wrong and you say, hey, I'm working for this company and the guidance that you produce or the baseline, for example, is not working for us, just tell us, right? Or ask questions otherwise. Otherwise, for example, I am from the certain company and I am not sure how to approach the CRA. It's quite helpful then to make sure we collectively produce the right guidance. If you are quite a listener person, you may want to check the podcast when we talked about that also. Application Security Weekly, quite a famous podcast about security on the internet. OK, I hope that was valuable, and we are all a little bit less scared now. After all, I don't think we have time for questions, but I'm around. Thanks very much for your attention. Swag, if you want to